She bent down to look at something on the side of the trail, and when her classmates looked up again, she was gone. The trail was narrow. There were steep drop-offs on both sides. The group was hiking single file. It would have been impossible for her to step off that trail without every single one of her classmates seeing it. They all looked up. She wasn't there. Trenny Gibson was 16 years old. She had a blue sapphire ring on her finger, her favorite blue Adidas shoes on her feet, and a future she'd been planning since middle school. She was going to study landscape architecture at the University of Tennessee. She was going to get a car for Christmas. She bent down to look at something on the ground, and she was never seen again. 200 people searched those mountains, 6 teams of bloodhounds, 2 Army helicopters, 3 weeks in near-freezing temperatures. Not a single piece of clothing, not a shoe, not her ring, nothing. That was October 8th, 1976, almost 50 years ago. And what happened next, in the days and weeks and years that followed, is something I still can't fully explain. I want to tell you something right up front. These are not legends. These are not stories someone passed down around a campfire until the details got soft and foggy. The names are real. The dates are real. The locations are real. And in every single case I'm going to walk you through today, there are investigators who spent years trying to find answers and came up empty. 4 people, 4 different places in these mountains, 4 different decades, and the same terrible question every time. Where did they go? I've been going through these cases for a long time now, and the thing that gets me, the thing I keep coming back to, isn't the mystery itself. It's the small details that sit wrong no matter how you look at them. A teacher who won't say where he's taking his class, a grandmother who writes letters in handwriting that doesn't sound like her, a mother who waits 11 hours to call the police, a couple who drives away for a late-night coffee and leaves their children asleep in bed. These are the details that stay with you. The ones that keep rearranging themselves in your head at 2 in the morning, looking for a shape that makes sense. We're going to start in the Smoky Mountains, October of 1976. A 16-year-old girl named Trenny Gibson, and we're going to follow this wherever it goes. Trenny Gibson lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. She was a junior at Bearden High School. Her family had moved to Knoxville 8 years earlier when her father took a job as a traveling salesman for a large chemical company. It was the kind of place he was happy to raise a family. Scenic, low crime, good schools, and the Smoky Mountains sitting right there on the doorstep. Trenny grew up there alongside 3 siblings. Her older brother had just shipped off to Navy boot camp in Florida the year she disappeared. She was the next one in line. By most accounts, she was the kind of kid who had things figured out. She'd spent the previous summer working at Morrison's cafeteria, saved almost $2,000, put half in a savings account, bought herself a blue sapphire and diamond ring with 600 of it, and kept the last 200 in her purse. She was 16. That's not how most 16-year-olds handle their first real paycheck. Her father was so impressed he promised her a car for Christmas if she kept her grades up. She was a straight-A student. She was already keeping her grades up. She loved music, especially the rock band Jethro Tull. She had a lot of friends. Several boys had crushes on her. She didn't pay much attention to that. She was focused on something longer term, landscape architecture at the University of Tennessee. She had a plan and she was working it. Her horticulture class was taught by Mr. Dunlap, and he was the kind of teacher students liked. Energetic, a little unpredictable. One day in early October of 1976, he told his students he was taking them on a surprise field trip the very next morning. He wouldn't tell them where they were going. He just told them they'd learn about plants and trees and have a wonderful time. Now, think about that for a second. The teacher telling 38 students the night before that he's taking them somewhere, refusing to say where in 1976. No permission slips sent home, no call to parents, no location disclosed. Today, that wouldn't happen. Back then, apparently, it did. And nobody at the school seems to have flagged it as a problem. Trenny came home and told her father. Mr. Gibson figured it was probably a hiking trip, maybe up in the Smoky Mountains. He was a former Eagle Scout and troop leader, so he sat down with Trenny and went through some basics. How to find north by looking at moss on a tree, which plants were edible if you got turned around and couldn't find your way back. He talked her through what to do if she got separated from the group. He was thorough about it, but both of them were pretty sure the trip would be cancelled. The forecast for the next morning was calling for rain. The next morning was Friday, October 8th. Trenny looked out her window, saw it was already raining, and assumed the trip was off. She put on her blue jeans, her blue striped sweater, her blue Adidas shoes, her blue sapphire ring. Her mother drove her to school. When they pulled into the parking lot, a bus was sitting in front of the school waiting. By 9 in the morning, an announcement came over the intercom. All 38 students in Mr. Dunlap's horticulture class were to report to the bus immediately. They were going to Clingman's Dome in the Great Smoky Mountains, about 90 minutes away. A destination Mr. Dunlap had known all along and chosen not to share with a single parent the night before. The weather was not good. It was drizzling and cold. The temperature was in the low 40s. The trail they were going to hike, up to Andrews Bald and back, was 2 miles each way along Thorny Ridge, with steep drop-offs on both sides and a surface that was slick from the rain. These were not ideal conditions for 38 teenagers in whatever they'd worn to school that morning. Trenny had on a blue striped sweater, no rain jacket, no layers. When the bus arrived at Clingman's Dome, Mr. Dunlap laid out the plan. Hike to the summit of Andrews Bald, observe the plants and trees at different elevations, take notes, write a paper over the weekend. Everyone needed to be back at the bus by 3:30 in the afternoon. The students spread out into smaller groups based on how fast they walked. Trenny fell in near the middle of the pack with a friend named Robert Simpson, who noticed she was cold and gave her his jacket. That detail matters later. By 1:30, the group had reached the summit and started heading back toward the bus. Trenny and Robert had been walking together the entire trip. Then, without explanation, Robert told Trenny he was going to go back and look for some bears, and he left her. That's the first thing that never made sense to me. He left her, alone, on a narrow trail with steep drop-offs on both sides, in the rain. And nobody's ever given a good explanation for why. Now, Trenny was in the middle of the group. There were students ahead of her and students behind her. The trail was narrow enough that single file was the only way to walk it. If she stepped off that trail, someone would have seen it. Multiple people would have seen it, which makes what happened next almost impossible to explain. About 3/4 of a mile from the bus, several of Trenny's classmates said they saw her bend down to look at something on the ground, on the right side of the trail. When they looked up again, she wasn't there. Nobody screamed. Nobody grabbed for her. There was no sound of sliding gravel, no cry from the drop-off, no snapping branches. She was there, and then she wasn't. Nobody thought much of it at the time. Maybe she'd stopped to tie her shoe. Maybe she'd seen something in the vegetation worth looking at for her paper. Maybe she'd fallen behind and would catch up at the bus. The bus came and went. 37 students, no Trenny. Mr. Dunlap took a small group of the last students back to the spot where she'd been seen. They walked the entire trail calling her name. Nothing. By 4:30 in the afternoon, he'd contacted the park rangers. By 7:30, a group of 19 rangers and volunteers was moving through the wind and rain and fog, calling her name through loudspeakers and whistles. The temperature was dropping toward the low 30s. A heavy wind was picking up. They searched through the night. By 5 the next morning, Trenny's father had arrived with a pair of her shoes so the dogs could track her scent. The road across Newfound Gap was closed. More than 200 searchers organized into half-mile grids, pushing outward to a 25-mile radius. 6 teams of bloodhounds and German shepherds, 2 Army helicopters from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, National Guard helicopters from both North Carolina and Tennessee. They had the mountains covered. There was nowhere to go that someone wasn't looking. And here's where it gets strange. Not just sad, which it already was. Strange. The bloodhounds found her trail. 3 separate teams picked it up. They followed Trenny from where she was last seen, back down the trail, to a place where it looked like she'd made a wrong turn onto the Appalachian Trail. Then they followed that trail until she circled the concrete base of the Klingman's Dome observation tower, back onto the Appalachian Trail, and then the scent just stopped, near Highway 441, like she'd stepped onto the road, or into a vehicle, or somewhere the dogs couldn't follow. That's not what happens when someone gets lost in the woods. That's a different kind of disappearance. When someone gets lost, the dogs cast out in widening circles trying to pick up a scent that wandered off the path. When someone drowns or falls, the trail ends at water or a drop. When someone is taken or gets into a vehicle, the trail ends at a road. Clean. Final. The trail ended at a road. And here's what I want you to think about while we keep going, because this is the question I still don't have a good answer for. If she stepped off that trail, even for 1 second, at least one person in that single file line would have seen her go. But nobody saw anything. Nobody. So how did she leave without being seen? Maybe she didn't go over the side. Maybe she went the other way. Maybe there was a break in the trees on the right side, a gap in the vegetation just wide enough, and she moved fast enough, and the person behind her had their head down watching the wet ground, and the person ahead hadn't looked back yet. That's the most generous reading. It's also the one that requires the most to go exactly right for someone with no plan and no way out. Drop your theory in the comments. I've been through every explanation I can think of, and not one of them holds up when you look at the next part, because there's something I haven't told you yet about Trenny Gibson. Something that was already in her life before this field trip, something that might explain everything or might explain nothing at all, and I need to tell you about it before we go any further. Here's the thing about cold cases. The question isn't always just what happened. Sometimes it's what the people in charge chose to focus on, and sometimes that choice tells you more than anything else. The search ran for 3 full weeks, near freezing temperatures. The same 25 square mile area combed over and over again. The FBI had launched a full investigation, and at the end of those 3 weeks, they made a public statement. They didn't believe Trenny was in the mountains. That's a significant thing to say. You've had 200 people, dogs, helicopters, the full weight of the federal investigation. And after all of that, you're telling the public you don't think this 16-year-old girl is in the mountains where she disappeared. They believed she might have been abducted. And then Trenny's father told them something. 2 years before this field trip, when Trenny was 14, a classmate from Bearden High School named Kelvin Bowman had been stalking her. He was obsessed with her. At some point, the situation escalated to the point where he broke into the Gibson home. Trenny's mother shot him in the foot. Kelvin Bowman was convicted. He spent time in juvenile detention. And while he was there, he made specific threats. He told people he was going to kill Trenny once he got out. The Knox County public school system released him and put him right back in the same school as Trenny. Now, when Trenny's father brought this to investigators, they looked into it. They checked attendance records. Kelvin Bowman had been in school the entire day on October 8, 1976, so either he wasn't involved, or the attendance record was wrong, or there's something else entirely. That's where the official investigation left it. Kelvin Bowman was ruled out. The Bloodhound Trail ended near the highway, and Trenny Gibson was never found. For 48 years, the people who were supposed to find answers have had nothing. No clothing, no shoes, no ring, no remains, no charges, no explanation. Here's what the evidence does tell us, and I want to go through it slowly because each piece matters. 1. The bloodhounds tracked Trenny to a point near a road. That means she moved under her own power from where she was last seen to that road. She wasn't unconscious and she wasn't carried, or the trail would have looked different. She walked there. 2. She didn't take her purse. Her mother had it. Trenny had no money on her, no identification, nothing except the clothes on her back and a borrowed jacket that belonged to Robert Simpson. 3. Nobody saw her leave the trail. In a single file line, on a narrow trail with students ahead of her and behind her, not one person saw her go. 4. Robert Simpson left her right before she disappeared, walked away to go look for bears on a trail in the rain with no explanation anyone has found satisfying. 5. An investigation ordered by President Carter in 1981 turned up nothing. 6 decades of additional searches have turned up nothing. Here's what that combination of facts means, as far as I can figure. Trenny reached that road. She either left with someone who was waiting, or she left with someone she went to meet, or something happened to her there that left no trace. Think about the bloodhound trail again. She didn't wander randomly. She moved in a specific direction to a specific point. That's purposeful movement. Either she was being guided, or she knew where she was going, or something else happened at that road that I haven't been able to account for. In 2023, almost 48 years after Trenny disappeared, investigators from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Persons were still working the case. It's never been closed. The question has never been answered. And here's the detail that reframes everything I've just told you. Trenny didn't bring her purse that morning. Her mother kept it. But Trenny had spent the previous summer earning nearly $2,000. She'd saved carefully. She had her ring on her finger. If she ran, and I'm not saying she did, she ran with nothing. No money, no plan, no way to get far. If she was taken, which is what investigators believed, they never found who took her or where she went. Both explanations leave a door open that no one has been able to close. I want to put you on that trail for a second. It's drizzling. The temperature is in the low 40s. You can hear the wind moving through the trees above you and water running somewhere below on both sides of the path. The trail is narrow enough that you're watching every step. The leaves are wet. The ground is slick. You're walking single file. There are kids ahead of you and kids behind you. And at some point, something on the ground catches your eye. Maybe it's a plant Mr. Dunlap talked about. Maybe it's something else. You bend down to look. And in the time it takes the person ahead of you to take 3 more steps and glance back, you're gone. Not screaming, not falling. Gone. I've thought about what those classmates must have felt when they got back to the bus and counted 37 instead of 38. The moment when Mr. Dunlap ran the name and there was no answer. When he took a small group back to the last place anyone saw her and called her name into the rain and the fog and got nothing back. 37 students boarded the bus back to Knoxville without her. Think about that ride. An hour and a half. Whatever was said on that bus. Whatever those kids were feeling by the time they got home. And I've thought about Trenny's father getting the call and going directly to her room for a pair of her shoes. Not because anyone told him to. Because he was an Eagle Scout and a troop leader, and he already knew that's what the dogs would need. He drove through the night with those shoes. He'd sat with her the evening before and talked through what to do as she got separated from the group. Moss on the north side of trees, edible plants, staying put or moving to high ground. He was prepared. He thought through worst cases. He was not prepared for this particular worst case. The bloodhounds followed her trail all the way to the road. They had her from the spot where she bent down, through the wrong turn onto the Appalachian Trail, around the base of the observation tower, back down the trail, all the way to the edge of Highway 441. And then they lost it. That's the moment I keep coming back to. The dogs had her scent through rain and wind and a trail that 38 other people had walked on. They followed it to a road. And then, whatever direction she went, they couldn't follow. There's only one explanation that fits that specific detail. That a trail ends at a road, cleanly, with no continuation. Somewhere near Highway 441, on the evening of October 8, 1976, Trenny Gibson got into a vehicle. Whether she chose to, whether she was forced to, whether she knew the person driving it, whether that vehicle was already there waiting when she arrived at the road, or whether it came along after, no one knows. 48 years of searching has not changed that. Trenny would be 65 years old today. Her ring would be worth more now than it was then. Her savings account, if it ever got touched, would have records somewhere. She'd studied for landscape architecture. She had plans. In the decade since October 8, 1976, not a single physical trace of Trenny Gibson has turned up in those mountains or anywhere else. Her case is still open. Her name is still on the missing persons list. And the question that every investigator who ever worked this case has had to live with is still sitting unanswered. She bent down to look at something on the ground. and she was gone. Robert Simpson has never given a fully satisfying explanation for why he left her on that trail. The trail was too narrow for her to vanish without a witness. The bloodhounds tracked her to a road. And Mr. Dunlap, the teacher who took 38 students into those mountains without telling them or their parents where they were going, is a detail that nobody has ever fully explained away. The next case left me with a different kind of question. Not a girl who vanished from a trail, but a couple who said goodnight to their children, walked out the front door at 2:30 in the morning and never came back. And what happened in the hours after their children woke up alone should have never been allowed to happen. Their oldest daughter was 11 years old. She was still awake when her parents left. The trailer walls were thin enough that she could hear them talking in the other room. She heard her father say, "Come on, if you're going with me, let's go." It was 2:30 in the morning. Her little brothers were asleep. Her parents were going to the truck stop 5 miles down the road for a late-night coffee. They never came back. Her father's car was never found. His paycheck from that Friday was never picked up. The $600 in cash sitting in a jar on the kitchen counter was never touched. Her mother's purse was left behind. Claude and Sue Shelton walked out of that trailer on a warm May night in 1971 and vanished so completely that 53 years of searching has found nothing. No car, no bodies, no explanation. And the question I can't shake is not just where they went, it's what they were driving toward. Claude Shelton was a mechanic, had been working at the same muffler and tire shop in Corbin, Kentucky for 10 years, 5 days a week without fail. He loved cars the way some people love a language. When he wasn't fixing customers' vehicles, he was working on his own. A 1967 two-door Ford Galaxy 500 that he kept cleaner than most people keep their living rooms. His co-workers said he was a perfectionist about it, the kind of guy who'd notice a rattle-free blot before anyone else in the car heard it. Quiet, spoken, dependable, steady. That's how people who knew him described Claude. Not the loudest person in the room, not the one making jokes at the counter, but the one who showed up every single day and did the work and never gave his boss a reason to worry. Sue was 27 and spent her days at home with their 3 kids. Corbin was a small town with barely 7,000 people, the kind of place where your neighbor knew when you went to the grocery store and what you bought. They'd lived there long enough that everybody knew them. By May of 1971, things were looking up. They were one payment away from owning their trailer outright. They were talking about a bigger house for the kids. They only had a week of school left before summer. Claude had asked for a half day off that particular Friday, promising his boss he'd make it up on Saturday morning. That afternoon, the whole family piled into the Galaxy and drove about 20 miles up to Claude's mother's house in Williamsburg. That stretch of road passes through some of the best scenery in eastern Kentucky: the Cumberland Falls area, the Daniel Boone National Forest, the Laurel River corridor where they were still building the dam. Perfect day for a drive. 70 degrees, windows down, kids in the back seat. They ate supper with Claude's mother and stayed too long, the way you do when you're having a good time and nobody wants to be the first one to say it's getting late. By the time Claude looked at his watch, it was past midnight and he had to be at work by 6. They drove home, got the kids into bed between 1 and 2 in the morning, and then Claude and Sue left. The truck stop was 5 miles away. That's not a long drive. In a town that small, at that hour, with no traffic, you'd be there in 8 minutes. 10 maybe, if you caught every red light, which wasn't likely at 2:30 in the morning. The employees who were working that shift at the truck stop told police they hadn't seen anyone come in that night. Not between 1 and 3:30 in the morning, no customers at all. So if Claude and Sue were heading to that truck stop, they never arrived. The children woke up the next morning to an empty house and a car that wasn't in the driveway. The oldest ate breakfast on her own and called one of Sue's friends. No one knew anything. By 7 in the morning, Claude's boss came to the door looking for him. Claude had never missed a day in 10 years. Police were called immediately. The first thing investigators noticed was the jar, $600 in cash on the kitchen counter, Sue's purse on the table, and down at the muffler shop, a Friday paycheck sitting in an envelope with Claude's name on it that nobody had picked up. People who choose to leave don't leave their money behind. Here's what was true about Claude and Sue Shelton, according to everyone who knew them. They were good parents. The kids were always with them. Claude had been at the same job for 10 years. They were a payment away from owning their home. They had a savings plan. They had a future they were building. And here's what was also true. On the night of May 21st, they put their kids to bed after midnight and drove away. Their oldest daughter was awake. She heard them leave. She heard the car pull out. And then nothing. Over the next 3 days, the Kentucky State Police searched the entire state. Civil Air Patrol teams flew the area. 4 rescue squads from nearby towns searched the woods and the lakes. News stations ran the story. No leads came in. And that's when the first real detail surfaced. A truck driver who passed through Corbin around 1 a.m. said he thought he remembered a car on the side of the road. Hood up. That's it. That's all he had. A car on the side of the road, hood up, in the middle of the night. Claude Shelton was a mechanic, one of the best in town. If he'd seen a stranded car on a rural road at 2 a.m, he might well have stopped. Might have figured it would take him 10 minutes to get them going, and he'd still make it to the truck stop. That's the kind of person people who knew him described. A guy who'd stop. But the truck driver couldn't give make, model, or color. Couldn't say whether there were people standing near the car or whether it was empty. He passed through at 50 miles an hour in the dark. It's a thread. Just a thread. But it's the only one we have. And here's the question I keep coming back to. If Claude stopped to help someone, what happened next? Because whatever it was fast. His car, a 1967 Ford Galaxy 500, has never been found. Not on any road, not in any impound lot, not at the bottom of any lake they've searched. More than 50 years ago, Claude Shelton drove a car that cannot be hidden easily. It's not a common vehicle. It was his prized possession. He kept it spotless. And it's gone. If you have a theory about where that car went, I want it in the comments. Because I've tried every direction this goes, and it always runs into the same wall. Here's the part that bothers investigators to this day. There was no one left to not believe. The children were moved to a family friend's house for the last week of school. When school ended and Claude and Sue still hadn't appeared, the kids went to stay with Sue's mother in Knoxville, Tennessee. What everyone thought would be a short visit lasted forever, because Claude and Sue never came back. The case stayed open. Investigators worked through every person who'd been in Corbin that night, eliminated them one by one, tracked down everyone who might have known the couple well enough to have a theory. They kept coming up empty. A nearby Laurel River Lake, which had been under active dam construction in 1971, became a focus later on. The lake is massive, more than 206 miles of shoreline, nearly 280 feet deep in some places. Dive teams have gone down looking for the galaxy. Nothing came up. In 2009, the Shelton children entered their DNA into the National Unsolved Crimes database, hoping it might lead to a match with unidentified remains somewhere in the system. No matches, anywhere in the United States. That's 50+ years, and not a single thread that led anywhere. The evidence in the Shelton case is mostly in absence. The car isn't there. The bodies aren't there. The money's still on the counter. The paycheck sat in that envelope for weeks before anyone touched it. No activity on any account, no contact with family, no sightings. What the evidence tells you, if you stack it up honestly, is that Claude and Sue Shelton did not plan to leave. Everything about the way they left says temporary. Late night coffee run, kids asleep in bed, money on the counter, purse on the table, paycheck waiting. Nobody who plans to disappear leaves like that. So something happened between the trailer and the truck stop. On a 5-mile stretch of road, in the middle of the night, in a small town where everybody knew everybody, and whatever it was, it left no trace. The truck driver's account is the only physical piece of this that doesn't fit the rest of the picture. A car on the side of the road with the hood up. That means something was wrong before they ever got to the truck stop. Or it means Claude saw someone else in trouble and pulled over. Both explanations lead to the same road. Both end at the same wall. Think about what it means for something like this to happen on a dead-end road in a small town in eastern Kentucky in 1971. Everybody knows everybody. Every car that drives by, someone notices. Every stranger who comes through, someone sees. You can't park an unfamiliar vehicle on the side of a rural road in Corbin at 2 in the morning without someone eventually mentioning it. And yet, no one saw anything. No one heard anything. No screech of tires. No altercation reported. Nothing turned up in those first 3 days of state-level searching. Whatever happened to Claude and Sue Shelton happened cleanly, quickly, on a short stretch of road between their trailer and a truck stop, in the kind of community where you can't sneeze without your neighbor saying, "Bless you." That takes planning. Or it takes an extraordinary run of bad luck in a very specific direction. Laurel River Lake is worth spending a moment on because it's the only physical location that's come up repeatedly in theories about this case. It was under active construction in May of 1971. The dam was being built. The lake wasn't at full capacity yet, which means the shoreline and the depths were still shifting. Areas that are underwater now might not have been accessible later. A car driven into that lake in the spring of 71 might have ended up in water that deepened considerably as the dam project finished. The search teams have gone down, 280 feet in some sections, more than 200 miles of shoreline. Nobody's found a 1967 Ford Galaxy 500 down there, but that lake holds a lot. Their children grew up without them. They grew up not knowing, and the family spent decades carrying that, the particular weight of a missing persons case, which is not grief exactly, because grief needs a body, a fact, a thing to hold on to. This is something else. This is a question that just keeps being a question. The Shelton children are in their 60s now. They gave their DNA to a database. They're still waiting for a match that has never come. Somewhere between that trailer and that truck stop, Claude and Sue Shelton ceased to exist in any record, any system, any corner of this country that anyone has looked in. The galaxy is still out there, or what's left of it. That lake covers more ground than most people think. Dive teams have gone down. They haven't seen it. But 280 feet of dark water holds a lot of things that don't want to be found. Here's what I keep coming back to. Claude was a mechanic. He would have heard engine trouble before most people would. If something had gone wrong with his car on that road, he would have known it was coming, unless the car trouble wasn't his, unless he stopped because somebody else needed help. And that person, or those people, were waiting for someone to stop, real quick. Both of those cases, Trenny Gibson, Claude, and Sue Shelton, were actively investigated. Rangers, FBI, state police, dive teams. Resources poured in, and the results were sealed in a cold case file that still hasn't been opened on the other side. That's why I keep going back to these accounts. Because the official record isn't the whole story, it's just the part that made it into the paperwork. If this channel matters to you, if these are the stories you want to keep finding, hit subscribe. We keep pulling them up, and there are more. Let's keep going. What comes next is the case that started the most rumors in the smallest community. A 6-year-old boy, a snowstorm, a hollow where everybody knew everybody, and a mother who waited 11 hours to call the police. Kelly Holland, Knott County, Kentucky, February 12, 1992. Kelly Holland was 6 years old. He had a cleft palate and severe asthma. He'd been in the hospital several times in the months before this. He had a scar on the left side of his mouth. On the morning of February 12, 1982, heavy snow had closed the schools in Knott County, Kentucky. Kelly asked his mother if he could go outside and play. He put on his snow boots. He put on his blue coat. He went out to the front yard. He was never seen again. His mother says she watched him from the window throughout the morning. By 4 in the afternoon, she says he was still outside playing in sub-freezing temperatures, wearing nothing but jeans and a light jacket. She left to make a phone call at a neighbor's house. When she came back an hour later, Kelly wasn't in the yard. She didn't call the police. Not at 5, not at 6, not at 7. At 6 o'clock, she made herself dinner and ate alone. The police weren't called until midnight, 8 hours after Kelly was last seen. In a snowstorm, Pine Tree Holler, Knott County, Kentucky. About 50 people lived there, the kind of place where everyone is connected by blood or by proximity or both. You knew every car by sound before it came around the bend. You knew every face. A stranger on the road stood out immediately. The road in was a dead end, which meant anyone who came in had a reason to be there, and everyone noticed when someone who didn't belong showed up. Kelly's mother, Judy Moore, had dropped out of school at 14. She'd married young, had 2 older children who'd been removed by Child Protective Services due to conditions at home. When Kelly was born in November of 1975, the state somehow missed it. He never came to their attention the way his siblings had. He grew up with Judy and her boyfriend Kurt Campbell in that rental house in the Holler. By 1982, Kelly was 6, kindergartner at Jones Fork Elementary School. He had asthma bad enough to have been hospitalized several times in the months before he disappeared. Bad enough that Judy initially said no when he asked to go outside in the cold. He also had a scar on the left side of his mouth from a cleft palate, but he was a mountain kid in the ways that mattered. He loved being outside. He loved the creek and the woods and the kind of exploring that keeps a 6-year-old busy for hours without adult supervision. That was normal for that time and that place. Kids ran free in hollows like this. You knew the boundaries. You knew everybody's yard. You came home when you heard your name. The night before Kelly disappeared, a heavy winter storm had blown through. By morning, Pine Tree Holler was buried under thick snow and the temperature was well below freezing. The mountain roads were too dangerous for the school buses. Snow day. For a 6-year-old boy, that's a gift. Kelly got up that morning, looked out at the fresh snow, and had one thing on his mind. He asked his mother if he could go outside. She said no at first. The asthma, the cold air, the wet. She gave in around 11 in the morning. He put on his snow boots. He put on his blue coat. He went out to the front yard. Judy says she checked on him through the window through the morning. Lunch came and went. He didn't come inside to eat. By 4 in the afternoon, Kelly was still outside in the cold, in sub-freezing temperatures, in nothing but jeans and a light jacket. The heavy coat he'd put on that morning wasn't mentioned again. At some point around 4 o'clock, Judy decided she needed to make a phone call to her sister. That required walking to a neighbor's house. She told Kelly she'd be right back. When she returned an hour later, Kelly wasn't in the yard. She assumed he was at a neighbor's house watching The Dukes of Hazzard. At 6 o'clock, she made herself supper and ate alone. At 7 o'clock, she walked to a neighbor's house to tell Kelly to come home. None of the neighbors had seen him. Not once, all day. That's when she panicked. But she didn't call the police. By the time Judy decided to call the police, she was at her boyfriend's grandparents' house. They told her she couldn't use the phone until after midnight, because the rates were cheaper then. Her child was missing. The snow was coming down. Footprints were being covered by fresh accumulation. The temperature was dropping. And Judy Moore sat in that house and waited for the phone rates to drop. Now, she had options. She'd already been to a neighbor's house earlier to make her phone call to her sister. She knew which neighbors had phones. In a hollow of 50 people, you're not more than a short walk from the nearest one. She could have knocked on any door. She could have explained what was happening. She could have been on with the sheriff's office inside of 5 minutes. She waited. What's more, word had begun to spread through the Holler by this point. The neighbors had figured out Kelly was missing and had started looking on their own, but none of them called the police either. Not one person in Pine Tree Holler picked up a phone before midnight. That's a strange thing. In a community that small, where everybody watches everything and everybody knows everybody's business, a 6-year-old boy goes missing on a snow day in sub-freezing temperatures, and for 8 hours, not one adult made the call. By the time the deputy sheriffs arrived, it was 2 in the morning. 8 hours had passed since Kelly was last seen. Footprints in the snow had been buried under fresh accumulation. The temperature was in the single digits by then. A 6-year-old boy with severe asthma, in jeans and a light jacket, had been outside and alone since before 4 in the afternoon. The State Highway Patrol arrived at 3 in the morning, but the snow and the total darkness made any search impossible. They would resume at first light. Kelly's chances of surviving overnight in those conditions were not good, and everyone at the scene knew it. The search started in the morning. It went on for 16 days. Every inch of the woods and creek beds and trails surrounding Pine Tree Hollow was covered. Every person in the hollow was interviewed and cleared, one by one, except for one thing that kept coming up. Every investigator who looked at this case came back to the same person, the only one who'd been with Kelly that day, the only one who'd seen him, the only one who knew what those hours between noon and midnight actually looked like: his mother. And here's what I want to ask you, because I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I still don't have a satisfying answer. Why did a mother in a community where everyone watches everything wait 11 hours to call the police when her 6-year-old didn't come home for lunch? Drop your answer in the comments, not your judgment, your theory. Because the investigators had plenty of judgment and not enough answers, and what they needed was a theory that held up. The investigators came back to Judy Moore multiple times. Each time, inconsistencies appeared. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. At some point, she told police she'd seen a strange green car in the area that day. She hadn't mentioned it before. She suggested Kelly's father, who lived in Florida, might have abducted him. Investigators tracked that down. It was a dead end. In March of 1982, a grand jury subpoenaed Judy Moore to testify about her son's disappearance. No charges were filed. The case went cold. Years passed. Psychics were brought in. Judy took a lie detector test and passed. Tips came in. A shallow grave spotted here, a fresh concrete porch poured there around the time of the disappearance. Investigators dug, found nothing. Judy Moore has never been charged with anything. She maintains her innocence to this day. And yet, her own parents, when she called them at midnight to tell them Kelly was missing, reportedly said, "I told you, we should have taken him too." That sentence has never been fully explained. 42 years have passed, no remains, no clothing, no blue coat, no trace. In the years after Kelly disappeared, a rumor circulated among the residents of Pine Tree Hollow. Judy's sister, people said, had told someone that both of them had killed Kelly and buried his body. Judy denied it. Her sister denied it. In 2010, Judy's sister died. People who knew her said she'd written a letter before she passed, a letter that was only to be opened after her death. That letter has never surfaced. No one knows if it exists. No one knows what's in it. No one has come forward to say they have it. A 6-year-old boy went outside to play in the snow on a school snow day. He disappeared from his front yard in a hollow where everyone knew everyone. And the only thread that's ever come close to pointing anywhere is a letter that may or may not exist, written by a woman who is no longer alive to confirm or deny it. Here's what a 6-year-old in sub-freezing temperatures looks like. He's cold fast. His asthma is triggered by cold air. He doesn't have the body mass to hold heat the way an adult does. His judgment isn't developed enough to make the decision to go inside and warm up before it's too late. If Kelly walked off that property and into the woods, which surround Pine Tree Hollow on all sides, he would have been in serious trouble within an hour, maybe less. In weather that was below freezing, with snow coming down, a child with asthma and no extra layers has a narrow window. The search teams knew this. That's why they pushed hard those first 16 days. Every creek bed, every tree line, every sheltered hollow that a scared child might have run to. They found nothing. Not even a footprint the snow hadn't swallowed. And somewhere in those 16 days, the focus shifted from finding a lost boy to understanding how a boy could vanish from his front yard in a dead-end hollow where no stranger could have come in without being noticed. The question was no longer whether Kelly was alive. The question was, what happened in that yard? Investigators released a sketch of what Kelly would look like today. He would be 43 years old. His case file is still open. His name is still in the database. The sketch is still circulating on missing persons networks, because as long as a case is open, you keep the name out there. You keep it visible. Someone might recognize something. The years after Kelly disappeared were quiet in the way cold cases go quiet. The tips slowed down. The searches stopped. Judy Moore was never charged. She passed a polygraph. The grand jury heard her testimony and returned without an indictment. She maintained her innocence and continued maintaining it for decades. Psychics came in. One tip pointed to a shallow grave in the woods off the holler. Another tip pointed to a concrete porch that had been poured around the time Kelly vanished. Investigators followed both. They dug. They found nothing. The rumor about Judy's sister kept circulating in the community for years. The claim was that the sister had told someone, privately, quietly, in the way people in small communities sometimes talk, that she and Judy had both been involved in what happened to Kelly. The sister denied it every time it came up publicly. Judy denied it. They had a falling out at some point and stopped speaking to each other altogether. In 2010, Judy's sister died. And people who knew her said she'd written a letter before she passed, a letter sealed with instructions that it only be opened after her death. That letter has never turned up, not with any family member who's come forward. Not in any legal proceeding, not in any tip line. If it exists, it's out there somewhere. In a house. In a box that got moved from address to address and never opened. In a storage unit someone is still paying for. In a landfill. Or it never existed. Or it existed and said nothing relevant. Or it existed and said everything, and whoever received it decided not to act on it. I don't know which of those is true. Nobody does. But it's the only door in this case that might still be open. And doors that might still be open are worth more than closed ones. The last case in this video is the one that took me the longest to make sense of. A grandmother, 71 years old, who had lived on the same farm for nearly 50 years, who loved her grandchildren more than anything, who walked into a bank one morning, withdrew $80,000 in cash, and walked out into the sun and was never seen again. And the letter she sent afterward didn't sound like her, not even close. Gladys, K-I-D-D, Morehead, Kentucky, August 6, 1990. The bank manager asked her to take a cashier's check instead. He told her it was dangerous to carry that much cash. Gladys' kid looked at him with a stone face, told him she wanted it in cash, and waited while the tellers counted out the $100 bills. She walked out of the First People's Bank in Morehead, Kentucky on a Monday morning in August of 1990. And that was the last time anyone saw her. Her car was found in the bank parking lot that afternoon. Keys still in the ignition. 8 years later, Gladys still hadn't renewed her driver's license. She never collected another Social Security payment. No account was ever opened in her name anywhere in the United States. It was as if she had stepped off the face of the earth with $80,000 and disappeared into nothing. She was 71 years old, Morehead, Kentucky. A small city in the foothills, less than 8,000 people, sitting along Triplet Creek in a valley ringed by Appalachian Mountains. Gladys' kid had lived there for 50 years. In a community that size, 50 years means you are woven into the place. You are part of the story of it. Her husband Claude had bought a 100-acre farm in 1944 and built her a ranch house perched high on Creek's Ridge. They'd raised their family there. Claude worked the farm. Gladys worked as a cook at Morehead State University, a job she'd held for years, feeding people, doing the work that holds an institution together even when nobody's paying close attention to it. When Claude died suddenly in 1983, Gladys went through a hard stretch, as anyone would after 50 years with a person. 7 years of widowing herself alone on a farm that she and Claude had built together. But she found a way through. She got more active in her church. She grew a garden that took up more of the yard every season. The farm became the center of family life in a new way. Her children and grandchildren coming out for every holiday and birthday. Gladys cooking the kind of meals that require all day and produce enough to feed 20 people. Those grandchildren were her whole world. That's not a cliche when people say it about Gladys' kid. It was the specific organizing fact of her life after Claude died. She spoiled them. She sent birthday cards and Christmas cards without fail, every single year, never late, never forgotten. When she talked about them, she lit up. Her neighbor Dora Stone had known her for 40 years. Dora told investigators after the disappearance that Gladys was the last person she'd expect to just vanish. Not a mean bone in her body. Would do anything for anybody. Said she couldn't imagine Gladys putting her family through this kind of pain and sorrow. Said there were no secrets between them, that they'd talked about everything. But that turned out not to be entirely true, because something had been changing in the months before August of 1990. Something Gladys hadn't told Dora Stone. Something she hadn't told any of her children. Something she had been keeping entirely to herself. It started with phone calls. In the months before she disappeared, the phone at the farm rang more than usual, and the pattern was specific. If anyone besides Gladys answered it, a grandchild visiting, one of her adult kids stopping by, the caller would hang up immediately and call right back, every single time, without saying a word. When Gladys answered, she took the call in a low voice, moved away from whoever was in the room, and after each call, she'd drop whatever she was doing, get in her car, and leave. No explanation, no destination offered, just gone, for hours at a time. Her children noticed. Of course they did. You can't hide behavior like that in a close family. They asked her who was calling. She wouldn't say. They asked where she was going afterward. She wouldn't say that either. The only thing she ever told them was that they'd be surprised if they really knew who it was. Think about that sentence for a second. Not, it's nobody important. Not, it's just a friend. It's, you'd be surprised. That's a very specific choice of words. It means she thought about how they'd react. It means she knew who this person was in relation to her community, and she knew that revealing his identity would change how people saw the situation. Her kids pushed harder. Arguments broke out. Gladys held the line. She was 70 years old, and she had spent her whole adult life being open with her family, and suddenly she was running out the door to meet someone she refused to name. At the same time, she'd mentioned to her oldest son that the farm was getting to be too much to manage on her own. Maybe she should think about downsizing. Maybe a smaller house closer to the grandchildren. Her son arranged for a realtor to take her around looking at properties. They spent a full weekend visiting houses. Gladys went through every showing. She looked at each house, and she showed almost no interest in any of them. Her son said later, it felt like she was going through the motions, like she was performing the idea of looking at houses without any real intention of buying one, like she already knew she wasn't going to be around. And through all of this, the calls, the secret meetings, the house tours that went nowhere, nobody in her family knew she'd already been in contact with the bank. Here is what Gladys Kidd did in the months before August of 1990. She secretly sold her 100-acre farm, the farm her husband had bought in 1944, the farm she'd lived on for nearly 50 years, the farm she'd raised her children on and spent 7 years widowing herself into something like peace on. She never publicly listed it. There was no sign in the yard, no realtor showing strangers through the house, no paperwork her family ever saw. Nobody in her family knew it was for sale. Nobody knew it sold. The whole transaction happened somewhere outside the family's view, arranged with someone Gladys had apparently been in contact with during those months of secret phone calls and disappearing drives. And on the morning of Monday, August the 6th, she got up early, drove her 1979 Malibu Classic to the First People's Bank in Morehead, and withdrew every dollar in her account. $80,000. In cash. Now think about that figure for a moment. Gladys lived on $700 a month in Social Security. That was her income. She didn't have savings in any amount that would explain $80,000 showing up in her account, not without the farm sale. She had quietly completed that transaction, deposited the proceeds, and said nothing to anyone. Not her kids. Not Dora Stone next door. Nobody. The bank manager tried to talk her out of it, asked her to take a cashier's check instead, told her it wasn't safe to carry that much cash. She looked at him with a stone face and said she wanted it in cash. She stood there while the tellers counted out the $100 bills, stack by stack. And she walked out of that bank and got into the sun, and no one in her family ever saw her again. Her car was found in the bank parking lot later that afternoon. Keys still in the ignition. No Gladys. Then the letters started. A few weeks after her disappearance, envelopes began arriving, all postmarked from different states, not one location, multiple, as if whoever was handling the mailing was moving around. One letter went to her grandson, telling him he could have the Malibu. 3 letters went to her 3 adult children, one each, all handwritten, all saying the same essential thing: don't look for me. Even if you find me, I won't come back. Leave this alone. And here's the detail her family noticed immediately, the one that stomped them cold. Gladys had a 4th grade education. She left school young. She was, by every account, a genuinely poor speller. Her writing was halting and simple, the kind of prose that comes from someone who's never been comfortable putting words on paper, full of the errors you'd expect. These letters had perfect grammar, clean penmanship, vocabulary and sentence construction that Gladys's children said flat out didn't sound like their mother, not just better than her usual, different, like a different person's voice wearing her handwriting. As if someone had written the words and asked her to copy them down, or as if someone else had written them entirely, practicing her signature, mailing them from states far enough from each other that no one could pin down a location. Here's what I want you to sit with before I keep going. Gladys Kidd had been secretly meeting someone for months, someone whose identity she wouldn't reveal even to her own children, someone whose calls made her leave the house immediately and stay gone for hours. She sold the farm without telling a soul. She withdrew $80,000 in cash and turned down a paper trail. She left her car in a parking lot with the keys in it. And then letters arrived, postmarked from different states, written in a voice that wasn't quite hers, telling everyone not to come looking. What's the most likely explanation for that combination? I mean it. Drop your theory in the comments. Because there are at least 3 different ways to read what happened, and each one leads somewhere different, and I genuinely want to know which one you land on. Missing persons reports were filed across the state of Kentucky. Investigators interviewed everyone who knew Gladys. No one had any information about the mystery caller. No one knew the farm had sold. No one knew about the bank withdrawal. She'd kept everything separate, compartmentalized, hidden from the people who saw her every week. That was not like Gladys. By every account, she was open, candid with her children about her finances and her life, had always depended on them for things. And then, in the space of several months, she had secretly arranged to liquidate everything she owned without a word to anyone. The letters created a legal problem. If Gladys had written those letters of her own free will, even if the language wasn't hers, then she was a consenting adult who had chosen to leave. You can't force someone to come home if they've told you not to look. But the family pushed back. They pointed to the handwriting, the language, the tone. They said it wasn't her. Investigators noted the discrepancy. But, absent something more concrete, the official position drifted toward she left voluntarily. The letters stopped coming. The phone was permanently silent, and Gladys Kidd simply ceased to appear in any record that anyone could find. In the years that followed, the evidence of absence compiled itself. Her driver's license expired. She never renewed it. Her Social Security payments, $700 a month she'd been collecting faithfully, stopped. She never applied for them again from a new address, never collected a single payment after August of 1990. No bank account was ever opened in her name, no utility bills, no medical records, nothing that would show a person continuing to exist in any practical sense. She had $80,000 in cash. Cash doesn't leave records. Cash is the one thing you can take and use and disappear on. But she was 71 years old. She had health issues. She'd lived in Morehead for 50 years. She'd been outside the state of Kentucky a handful of times in her entire life. She had grandchildren she loved more than anything. The kind of woman who sends a birthday card every year without fail. Who built her life around those grandchildren. And she left them. All of them. Forever. Either she chose to, for reasons her family couldn't understand, with a person whose identity she protected fiercely for months, or she didn't choose. The letters are the thing that keeps this case from settling. Because if someone helped her write those letters, or wrote them for her entirely, then those letters weren't the end of the story. they were the cover, and someone put a lot of thought into the cover. I've read those letters described multiple times, the way investigators and family members characterize them, and the thing that haunts me most is a simple question. If you wanted to make sure no one ever looked for someone again, what would you write? You'd write exactly what those letters said. Don't look for me. If you find me, I won't come back. You'd make sure each letter came from a different state, so no one could pinpoint a location. You'd use language formal enough to suggest clear-headed decision-making, even if it didn't sound like the person who supposedly wrote it. You'd be thorough. You'd think it through. Those letters were thorough, and the woman everyone who knew her described, a woman with a fourth-grade education, born during the Depression, who had barely left the state of Kentucky, who sent birthday cards to her grandchildren every year, who spent her Sundays baking cakes and cookies for the church fundraiser. That woman had to either have changed completely in a very short span of time, or someone else was making decisions for her. The mystery caller. The months of secret meetings. The farm sold without a word to her family. The cash. The car left in the parking lot with the keys in the ignition. The letters. Every piece of this points in the same direction, and that direction has never led anywhere. Gladys Kidd would be 105 years old today. She isn't alive. Whatever happened to her, she is gone. But the $80,000 is still out there somewhere. Either spent long ago by someone who planned for it, or moved through channels that didn't leave records, or sitting in a hole somewhere that no one will ever find. And somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, or in the states those letters were mailed from, or in a community no one would think to look, someone knows what happened to a 71-year-old grandmother who walked out of a bank on a Monday morning with $80,000 in cash and was never seen again. The birthday cards stopped. The Christmas cards stopped. The grandchildren grew up. They're adults now. Some of them probably have children of their own. Gladys, if she'd lived, would have had great-grandchildren to spoil. Her neighbor Dora Stone said she couldn't see Gladys putting her family through all this pain and sorrow, said it didn't fit the woman she'd known for 40 years. I believe Dora Stone. I just don't know what that means for what happened in that parking lot. 4 people, 4 cases, 4 times the mountains took someone and didn't give an answer back. What connects Trenny Gibson and Claude and Sue Shelton and Kelly Holland and Gladys Kidd isn't just geography. It's the same thing in every case. Someone who knew what happened and didn't say. Evidence that should have led somewhere and didn't. An official record that closed without actually closing. Investigators who spent years and came up with nothing. Not because they didn't try, but because someone or something made sure there was nothing to find. That's what keeps me coming back to these accounts. Not the mystery alone. It's that specific feeling that somewhere there's a person who knows, a person who has lived with that knowledge for decades, a person who might still be alive, still living near these mountains, still carrying it. Here's what I want to know from you. Out of these 4 cases, and I mean this as a real question, not a general one, which one do you think is closest to having an answer sitting somewhere unfound? A letter in a drawer, a car at the bottom of a lake, a witness who's never been asked the right question? Tell me in the comments and tell me why. Because some of the most useful threads in accounts like these have come from people who found this channel, watched through to the end, and decided to finally say something they've been holding for years. If you want to stay inside these mountains with me, new accounts go live every week, and the ones coming next have been sitting in a file on my desk for 3 months because I needed more time before I was ready to talk about them. Hit subscribe. The next video is right there on screen.